and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. Yesterday, after the publication of allegations against the Speaker, Peter Slipper, contained in a civil suit filed before the federal court by one of his staff members, James Ashby, Mr Slipper stood down from his post pending the resolution of allegations of potentially criminal behaviour related to the use of cab charge documents. Mr Slipper has emphatically denied all the allegations, and the government is hopeful that allegation about the cab charge documents will be dealt with quickly. But the opposition is calling for Mr Slipper to stand down until all the allegations are resolved, raising the possibility of a parliamentary vote on the Speaker when the House next sits on Budget Day. Joining me to discuss the events are Liberal MP John Alexander and Labor MP Steve Georganas. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Lyndal. Great to be here.
We'll come to the matter of the Speaker in a moment, but there are broader questions about the way allegations are treated, including by the media. If I could ask you both, John first and then Steve, do you think the principle that people are innocent until proven guilty is sacrosanct?
Absolutely, and there is no doubt that that is our position, and Peter should be the beneficiary of that. I think he has done the right thing in standing aside, but he is innocent until proven guilty. And Steve?
100% correct. Of course, Peter has, as we just heard from John, has done the right thing. And certainly the PM has said that he's done the right thing as well, and he should be given the presumption of innocence just like any other citizen. And now that there are proceedings in place, those proceedings should take place uninterrupted without any interference from anyone.
Well, as you mentioned, the Prime Minister believes that Mr Slipper did the right thing, while one of the independents believes there could be a case for Mr Slipper to stand aside for a longer period.
I believe the decision Mr Slipper made yesterday to step aside while allegations relating to potentially criminal matters are investigated, I believe the decision he made to step aside was the appropriate decision.
If they are of substance, once all of us know what the full story is, I think there is a case where both the civil and the criminal matters need to be dealt with before the Speaker returns.
John, do you believe that Mr Slipper should stand aside until all the allegations are resolved?
Yes, I do. I think that would be the appropriate thing. It seems to be that is his intention. The problem here is how long will these proceedings go on for?
But if he's entitled to the presumption of innocence and these are allegations, why should he have to step down at all if before the allegations are tested or proved?
Well, my reading of Peter is that he does have a great respect for the position that he holds. It is a position that would demand the highest levels of integrity, and I think he's trying to show that.
Steve, the government had been saying on the weekend that this was Mr Slipper's decision, that he was entitled to the presumption of innocence. Why now say that he did the right thing by standing aside? Shouldn't you say if he's entitled to the presumption of innocence, then he's entitled to remain in his post, because these are at this stage just allegations?
Well, you're quite right. That's what they are at this point, just allegations. But I think the decision that Mr Slipper took on his own accord was the correct decision, and I think when there are allegations like this, it is the right thing to do. Mr Slipper has decided to step down from his parliamentary official position, and that is the correct decision, as I said, until these things are looked at by the proper processes that are in place now without any interference. And as I said, this should be allowed to take its course, and then once we all have the results, then you can move on to the next step. But I think it was the right decision, as the Prime Minister has already indicated that it was the right thing to do.
Mr Slipper made it clear in his statement yesterday that he's standing down while the allegations, potentially criminal allegations, are resolved. Steve, do you think if they are resolved in his favour that he should take up the chair again?
Certainly, if they are resolved in his favour, he should take up the chair again. And of course, from what we've heard today, that these investigations shouldn't be too hard or shouldn't take too long to look into. So, as I said, he deserves the presumption of innocence, just like any other citizen of Australia, and these processes will take their place, and they should do so without any interference from the opposition or anyone else.
John, if Mr Slipper does take the chair again if the criminal allegations are resolved in his favour, what action would the opposition be prepared to move to try and keep him stood down for longer until the resolution of the civil allegations?
Well, I think we are relying on, at this moment, that Peter has respect for this position and has stood down. I understood it until all issues are resolved. The civil issue, of course, is of less weight than the criminal issue.
He did make it clear in his statement yesterday that he's standing down just in relation to the criminal allegation. So do you know at this stage if the opposition is prepared to move action in the Parliament, to take action in the Parliament to keep him stood down for longer?
No, I don't know whether our leader has made that decision at this point.
Do you think that if your leader has called for him to stand down while all the allegations are resolved, that you should be prepared to back that with parliamentary action?
Look, I think in consideration of the office of Speaker, that it does demand the highest of standards, that while there is a question over the Speaker, that it is probably best for all parties that he remains stood aside.
Now, the court documents make allegations that claims about Mr Slipper's behaviour were raised with the then Prime Minister John Howard's senior advisor. The government says Mr Slipper was endorsed 9 times as a candidate by the coalition. Mr Abbott says Mr Slipper was on his way out. One independent, Tony Windsor, who doesn't think the Parliament should be trying Mr Slipper, also seemed to be putting a bit of distance between himself and Mr Slipper today. This is what they had to say.
Do you think the Slipper appointment was a wise one?
Well, I didn't appoint him.
So did the Howard government ignore everything that was happening?
No. Look, Mel, we were trying to get him out of the Parliament. We were trying to get him out of the Parliament. He was going to lose his pre-selection. And while we were trying to get him out of the Parliament, the Prime Minister gave him the biggest job in the Parliament.
John, Mr Abbott has made the point that there's a difference between rumours and action taken in a court. But at the time, he says that the coalition was trying to get Mr Slipper out of Parliament. There was no action before the court. So do you understand why on the 10th occasion Mr Slipper was putting himself up as a candidate, he was going to be disendorsed and not the 9 times before?
Well, in the time that I have been in Parliament, I was aware that that there were questions over his behaviour. There had been incidents regarding entitlements in the past, and I think it had gotten to a breaking point where he was not going to be endorsed, and I think that had been a hard decision. Peter had been a member of the coalition for a long period of time, but it had got to that point that he was not going to be endorsed, and yet the Prime Minister's judgment, which is so often questioned when you're appointing somebody who should be beyond question, did diametrically the opposite to what we were doing.
Steve, senior Labor backbenchers I've spoken to today say while Mr Slipper is denying the allegations and is entitled to the presumption of innocence, and they've raised concerns about effectively trial by media, they do acknowledge that this episode is damaging the government. Do you think it is?
Well, look, certainly we'd rather not have this incident. We'd want to go on and talk about a good aged care reform package that was announced last week, about the NBN, about the 700,000 jobs that we've created since we've been in government, and the good news that is around which has made Australia a better place, and the future of Australian jobs and the future for the next generation of Australians. They're the things we want to be talking about. So certainly no one wants to be talking about these sort of things. But since it's come up, as I said, there are processes in place, and they should be allowed to take their course without any interference. Can I also add another thing about Mr Abbott? Mr Abbott, as recently as last year, towards the end of last year in a doorstop, had said that Mr Slipper, when asked the question about Mr Slipper, that he had his full confidence. So for Mr Abbott to come out in the last few days and say that they were trying to get rid of him is absolute bizarre, and certainly someone has to ask the questions of Mr Abbott. Was he aware of any of these allegations, and what did he do when he was a member of Cabinet, a member of the executive government, and leader of the opposition, and of course Minister back in the Howard government?
We we might move on from these issues. I'll ask you both a couple of separate questions. John Alexander, the question of a second airport for Sydney has been raised again. Do you think that it's finally time to build a second airport for Sydney, or that it's not yet needed?
Well, Sydney desperately needs a second airport. There is no doubt about that. I would say, though, that the consideration of a second airport should only be taken in consideration as whether there is going to be a fast train service from Sydney to Melbourne. If that is going to be built in any time in the near future, well, then that will mitigate a great deal as to where that second airport might be. It would reduce the pressure on Sydney Airport, a fast train service that would service not just Sydney to Melbourne, but also the regional areas, and give those regional cities the opportunity to grow. So I think there are bigger issues that should be addressed when the second airport for Sydney is being looked at, and possibly within the addressing of the bigger issues of the cost of living in Sydney and Melbourne and the pressures of Sydney and Melbourne are suffering, could they be alleviated by a rapid train service between Sydney and Melbourne and an international airport, possibly in Canberra, as Barry O'Farrell recommends.
Do you have a preference for either a second airport in the Sydney Basin or the option put up by Mr O'Farrell?
I very much favour the fast train from Sydney to Melbourne and an international and freight airport in Canberra. Sydney is just about the most expensive city to land a person or a piece of freight, and it is the infrastructure surrounding the Sydney airport that has the limitation on it, and that's the cost that you've got to look at if you're going to go to Badgerys Creek, is the infrastructure to support an airport out there. Would that infrastructure money be better spent building a fast train that would see enormous growth in Goulburn and the Canberra Queen Bee Yass area?
And Steve, during this parliamentary break, you've spent some time in Afghanistan. Do you agree with the government's assessment that progress is being made? And what did you think of the work the troops are doing?
Yeah, look, first of all, on the troops, I think they do a magnificent job. Having been over there in Afghanistan with the troops, it gives you a different perspective, absolute respect for our troops, the very professional manner that they operate in. I think the announcements by the Prime Minister and Defence Minister last week were very good, and we know that the work that we've done has ensured that the Afghan National Army will be left in a position where they can take control, and they're already doing that. And we saw evidence of this in Afghanistan when I was there 2 weeks ago. So I think the work that we have done is leaving behind a legacy, a great legacy of national security amongst the Afghan people themselves to resolve their issues.
And did you think the troops appreciated you spending some time there?
I think so. Look, I think it's always good to go over there to appreciate the work that they do, to speak to them one-on-one, to hear what their views were, what they had to say, and to witness the very professional manner in which they conduct their operations.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. John Alexander and Steve Georganas, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Lyndal.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Please be with us at the same time tomorrow.